The Roman Empire gave the world laws, roads, architecture, but it also left a dark legacy, a memory of how easily civilization can turn death into a spectacle, slowly, with sorrow. Imagine you stand inside a vast arena, surrounded by tens of thousands of spectators. Their shouts merge into a roar that slams against the stone vaults of the Colosseum, tense with pauses. Before you stands a Roman soldier, nearby a cage. In the cage, a hungry lion roars. But that is not the worst thing yet. Ancient Rome was not only a center of law, culture, and arts. It was an empire where execution became a show, where death turned into entertainment and torture into an art form. Firmly, you think you've seen cruelty? No. In Rome, execution and torture were elevated to theater. Death was staged, horrible, bloody, and shockingly ingenious. Burning people alive was among the most terrifying and theatrical executions. In Rome, it was often made even more elaborate. The condemned were doused with pitch, raised on a wooden stake, and set alight at night. Romans called such people living torches. They were used not only for execution, but even to light gardens at nighttime games or banquets. Imagine, in Nero's gardens, human torches burned, illuminating festivities. Few know that sometimes the condemned were forced to kneel with their hands bound to the ground before being lit, so that they resembled candles placed beneath statues of gods. Ghastly. Yes, chroniclers recorded such events. This is not mere legend. With sorrow, one of the demon's devices was the bronze bull. Coldly, a huge bronze statue of a bull with a hollow interior. A man was locked inside while a fire blazed beneath. The metal heated and the person inside burned alive. Calmly, with pauses, Romans added cruelty. Pipes inside turned the victim's screams into a dreadful roar. Slowly, eerily. For the audience, it seemed the statue came to life, the bull roaring ominously. Picture the moment. The crowd laughs and applauds, while from the belly of the bronze beast comes an elongated, surreal sound, part human wail, part animal roar. But the most famous and perhaps most excruciating execution was crucifixion. Firmly, this was not a quick death. It was hours-long agony. Slowly, a person nailed to a cross did not die immediately. Victims died from asphyxiation. The body sagged, breathing became impossible. Sometimes death came after a day, sometimes after 3. Do you know what Roman executioners did to hasten death? They broke the condemned's legs. With broken legs, the victim could no longer push up and soon suffocated. Aggressively. Sometimes, however, the authorities prolonged the torment deliberately, binding instead of nailing, so the agony lasted longer. Ghastly, slowly. There was a punishment for soldiers too, decimation. firmly. If a legion showed cowardice or mutinied, 1 in 10 men was executed. Calmly. Soldiers drew lots. The one who lost was killed by his comrades. Coldly. This was not mere punishment. It was a psychological horror that destroyed trust and bonds within the army. Slowly, with sorrow. There are accounts that sometimes prisoners were tied down, their bellies opened, and their entrails exposed to birds. Whispered tensely. Eagles, the symbol of Rome, were sometimes used to peck at the living flesh. Slowly, coldly. Was it justice or a barbaric spectacle where sacred symbols were turned into instruments of torture? Aggressively. Arenas were places where execution became entertainment. Condemned people were thrown to wild beasts, lions, bears, leopards, a punishment called damnatia ad bestias. Calmly. The crowd demanded spectacle, and animals were provoked to make each scene maximally dramatic. Sometimes the condemned were tied to stakes. Sometimes they were left unarmed, and sometimes they were handed toy weapons to make their resistance look theatrical, ghastly. Now, one of the most horrific and little-known tortures, scaphism. Tensely. The victim was stripped and placed in a hollowed boat or barrel so that head, hands, and feet protruded. They were fed milk and honey to induce constant diarrhea, then smeared with honey over the exposed parts. Ghastly. The boat was left in the sun, slowly. Insects swarmed, laid larvae, putrefaction set in. Death stretched over unbearable days. Yes, Romans devised slow, elaborate agony. With sorrow. Sometimes condemned people were given a chance, turned into a makeshift gladiator. They were handed blunt weapons and released, calmly. But they faced not only professional fighters, but also hungry beasts simultaneously. Imagine a man with a wooden sword against an armed gladiator and a starving tiger, building intensity. The crowd roared, a double spectacle, fight and hunt, ghastly. Decapitation was considered a noble execution, reserved often for Roman citizens. Calmly. But even here, Rome added theater. Sometimes the head was shown to the crowd or displayed in the forum for days as a warning. Slowly, coldly. There are mentions that a cage with a rat was tied to a condemned man's belly. Whispered tensely. The cage was heated from below. To escape, the rat gnawed into the victim. A long, torturous end, ghastly. There existed a punishment for parricides, sewn into a sack with a dog, a rooster, a monkey, perhaps a viper, and thrown into water, calmly. It was believed the murderer of a parent should die amid chaos, surrounded by symbols of transgression, slowly, coldly. Another practice was the pit of hell. Criminals were thrown into deep shafts filled with poisonous animals, snakes, scorpions, spiders. A person found themselves in complete darkness, where every rustle could be deadly. Slowly, with horror. Sometimes Romans used public torture on boats or rafts. The criminal was tied to a log and left to drift downriver, where the current slowly carried them into the unknown. Witnesses called it death in slow motion. Yes, with sorrow. No less terrifying was the method of liquid flesh. Victims were submerged in molten tin or in a mixture of hot resin and sand. Observers noted that a human scream could not be likened to any natural sound. It was unique and terrifyingly harmonious in its horrific monotony. Aggressively, there were cases of execution by shame. Criminals were exhibited in public squares, stripped of their clothes, branded, and forced to crawl before the crowd. This was moral agony. The body suffered, but the mind endured unbearable humiliation, slowly with sorrow. Gladiatorial combats represented a separate form of public execution and spectacle. Often prisoners convicted of crimes but trained for combat were sent into the arena. One man's victory meant another's death, and sometimes even the victor would become the victim of a new trial, aggressively. Historical records describe cases where executions became a game of the mind. For example, a senator condemned for corruption had to pass a series of trials in the arena. First against wild beasts, then against gladiators, then through tests of fire and water. Each new trial prolonged the agony and amplified the spectacle. Suetonius described it as turning life into a slow theater of fear. One of the rarest and most unusual executions was called execution by sound. The victim was tied to a special contraption where the ringing of bells or trumpets intensified psychological pressure. People lost their minds faster than their bodies tired. This method was experimental, yet brutal and effective, slowly with sorrow. We must not forget the fear of the crowd. Sometimes criminals were placed on a pedestal in the center of a square and forced to endure humiliations, performing absurd and painful tasks, fetching water from boiling cauldrons, standing on thorns, holding heavy weights for hours. Rome also used a method we can call immersion into darkness. The criminal was placed in a chamber without light, food, or water. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, until the person lost orientation, reason, and memory. The crowd witnessed not a physical death, but a torturous disintegration of the self, slowly, with horror. Even official festivals included executions. During Saturnalia, or the festival of Signum Maximus, the public was shown how lawbreakers paid with their lives. Sometimes it became an interactive theater where spectators could decide the condemned's fate, survival, or a slow, torturous death. Aggressively. Romans also used psychological tricks. A criminal could be brought into the amphitheater in lavish clothing, endowed with symbols of authority, and then stripped of everything with a single stroke of a sword. The crowd witnessed the total fall of a hero, and a terrifying mix of fear and fascination created a unique atmosphere of control and intimidation. Slowly, with sorrow. One of the darkest chapters belongs to the aftermath of the slave war led by Spartacus. After the rebellion was crushed, the Roman commander Crassus ordered thousands of captured slaves to be crucified along the Appian Way, a line of crosses stretching for miles, a grim road sign meant to warn anyone who might think of revolt. Slowly, with horror. Imagine approaching Rome by that ancient road, the sun beating down, dust in the air, and on every hill a silhouette of a crucified body, a landscape carved by fear, slowly, with sorrow. Emperors themselves sometimes staged cruelty as political theater. Nero is said to have used human beings as walking torches in his gardens during nighttime banquets. Whether exaggerated by hostile writers or grim reality, chroniclers recorded such spectacles as proof that power could be perverted into taste for cruelty. Caligula's reign mixed paranoia with shocking punishments. He reportedly humiliated senators publicly, ordered executions for trivial slights, and delighted in unpredictable cruelty. Whether legend amplified his madness, the effect was the same. Terror spread among the elite, and privilege offered no sure protection. Slowly, with anger. After the Jewish revolts, Roman generals used mass executions and public displays of bodies to crush resistance and mark the reassertion of imperial order. Siege and sack produced scenes ancient writers could not ignore. Walls cluttered with the dead, monuments of conquest that doubled as warnings. Slowly, with horror. Trials could end with theatrical punishments. A freedman found guilty might be paraded in chains, humiliated before the forum, then handed to an executioner who performed the sentence with staged solemnly. The forum became a stage where law and spectacle mixed. Slowly, with sorrow. Consider the role of the crowd. The Roman public was not a single entity. Some came for civic duty, some for food distributions, many for the thrill of games. The smell of roasted meat, the taste of wine, the sun on their skin. Ordinary sensations sat beside the extraordinary, men broken by force, beasts tearing flesh, executions with ritual precision. This normalized violence. Writers reacted differently. Seneca lamented the appetite for spectacles and pleaded for moderation, describing the moral corrosion of a people who fed on the misery of others. Others cataloged punishments with grim detachment. These voices give us a picture of a society that both condemned and consumed cruelty. Slowly, with sorrow. Consider the punishment of parricides. Roman law singled out the killer of a parent for a specially horrific death, sewn into a sack with animals and thrown into water. The symbolism is deliberate. Unite the parricide with animals, deny burial rites, erase memory by reducing him to the unhuman. Public executions were also instruments of economic theater. Games were financed by sponsors seeking status and emperors seeking popularity. A lavish show with exotic animals or machines displayed wealth, absorbed political tension, and redirected unrest into controlled spectacle. Slowly, with sorrow. Some punishments took place at religious festivals, linking the act to sacred time. Performing an execution during a festival suggested the punishment was not merely civic, but cosmic, a purging of impurity. Sacralization transformed cruelty into communal necessity. Think of the craftsmen of death, executioners and mechanics who built devices, the bronze bull, stocks, the wheel. These experts delivered consistent pain with precision. The specialization of violence made brutality efficient and systematic. Yet resistance and compassion appeared. Spectators sometimes threw flowers to a condemned man or tried to ease a dying person's breath with water. There were moments when the crowd refused to roar and fell silent. Empathy surfaced, reminding us the appetite for spectacle was not absolute. What remains for us today? Ruins like the Colosseum resonate because architecture outlives its makers. Stones remember footsteps. Archaeology uncovers trapdoors and cages that turn cities into theaters of punishment. To study these artifacts is to read a culture that mastered grandeur and cruelty simultaneously. Slowly, with sorrow. And the question returns, why turn execution into spectacle? For power? For fear? For entertainment? Ancient Rome showed that the line between law, entertainment, and violence is thin. Remembering these stories is crucial as warning and memory of our shared human history. Diving into the chronicles of Tacitus and Suetonius, we understand that Roman horror was systemic, meticulously planned, and psychologically calibrated. Every execution, from crucifixion to immersion in resin, from the breaking wheel to execution by sound, was designed to sink into public memory. Slowly, with sorrow. We look at the Colosseum today as a ruin of beauty. Remember, its stones are soaked with the cries of thousands. Every crack holds the echo of their suffering, slowly, with cold. And perhaps that is the most frightening reminder of what happens when power and cruelty join forces.